It all started with a very simple idea. Tell the stories of how successful middle market CEOs made it to the corner office. I'm Brant Handley, founder and managing director of Resource Options International, or ROI. We're the USA's premier executive search firm focused exclusively on empowering middle market companies to attract, hire, and retain A players while transforming top executives' careers and lives. ROI's Into the Corner office is dedicated to discovering how middle market CEOs advance their career, and we're making these remarkable and sometimes quite unbelievable stories available to you for the very first time. Listen and learn about the challenges they've overcome, the interesting people they've met along the way, and the lessons learned that steered these executives' unique journey into a middle market corner office of their own. I know you enjoy these CEO stories as much as I've enjoyed recording them. So thank you for listening today. And if you like what you've heard, rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm looking forward to you joining me on the next great middle market CEO adventure into the corner office. My guest today is Marc Mlyn, President and CEO of RaySearch Americas, a wholly owned subsidiary of RaySearch Laboratories based in Sweden. Marc began work in medical physics, doing research as an undergrad in the late 1980s. He worked in radiation therapy hospitals until 1997, and then as a customer service specialist for ADAC, which was soon acquired by Philips Medical System. He became a senior service manager there, traveling the world and working with distributors and sales staff globally. In 2007, Marc went to CIVCO and became the Vice President of Marketing, developing software and hardware systems for radiation therapy. When RaySearch Laboratories released a new software program in 2011, he was asked to start up the Americas organization to provide sales, support, and training. They grew from 3 to 40 people over the next few years, and Marc has built a successful organization with offices in New York City and Santa Clara, California. Marc has a bachelor's degree from Stony Brook University, an MBA from the New York Institute of Technology, and an MS in Cybersecurity from the Georgia Institute of Technology. Not bad for a kid from the Bronx. Marc Mlyn, welcome into the corner office.
Thanks, Brent. I really appreciate the invitation.
Great to have you here. And gosh, we've had a couple of conversations prior to it. Where do we find you today on the podcast?
So I live in Long Island, New York.
Nice.
Grew up in the Bronx and went to school out here. And Long Island's a little bit nicer than the Bronx, so this is where I stayed.
Summer setting in already in New York?
Yeah, it's actually pretty hot, but working from a home office, I don't really have to go out too often.
Love it. Love it. Well, we always like to kind of start in the early years, Marc, and you've got a very, very interesting story. Tell us a little bit about it, where you grew up and what that early family life was like.
Sure. Before I start telling the story, I just want to make sure that I don't come across as someone that grew up in a slum somewhere, because that's really not what it was like. But I did grow up in the Bronx, and somewhat of a sad story where my father passed when I was 7 years old, and my mother was disabled. So lived in the Bronx. A lot of city and state, subsidies sort of helped us out. And one sister who was a few years younger than me. And it was sort of, a Bronx kind of story. The Bronx in the late, or I should say 70s and 80s, was not always the easiest place to grow up, but I think my mother did her best, and I think everything worked out okay in the end.
I think your grandparents were actively involved in your upbringing. Is that right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when my father passed away, my grandparents didn't live too far away. They also lived in a different area of the Bronx, and I spent a lot of time with them. And they were just wonderful and really great role models for me. And it was really a great opportunity to learn from them. And, my grandmother had, I think, 4 or 5 sisters. And so those great aunts were also in my life when I was young.
There's some good folks pouring into you, it sounds like.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, you got involved in martial arts pretty early. How old were you when you first took that up?
So I was 13, and, from 7 to 13 was kind of a tough time, right? Without a father, and, my mother wasn't, perfectly well. And I think what happened was probably right before I was 13, I was mugged. Not a major event, just had a cheap little watch taken, but my mother put me in a martial arts class, which was there in the Bronx. And it was probably the best thing that she could have ever done for me. So I was 13 years old. And I've really stayed mostly active, although now I'm 57, so it's a little bit harder to do spinning back kicks. But I've just sort of dabbled in martial arts my entire life, and it was a very, very important part because really the martial arts was sort of a surrogate father for me.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about what it was like in those early teenage years, particularly getting into the dojo. What were some of the things that say that you've learned then that still really apply to you today?
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, so I wasn't a great student. I went to school. I sort of did what needed to be done, but I don't think I was motivated the way that I was in later years where I got more advanced degrees. So for me, it was really about martial arts, and it was one thing that I was really good at, and I was assistant instructor, so I learned a lot about teaching. I learned a lot about being strong and being disciplined, and all those things that I think that kids tend to learn either from their parents or from other sports that they may be in, team sports. I learned primarily from martial arts. So all that Zen stuff and sort of being in control of your emotions and being disciplined and doing what needs to be done. That was really what I got from that. And again, in the Bronx, there were constant challenges. There was some violence, and we haven't really talked about it yet. But moving. So I guess I was in my sophomore year of high school, and this time I was mugged at knife point, which I successfully defended against. I was a brown belt at the time, I think. But my grandparents, who were still alive at that point, they were like, okay, that's it. And they pulled me out of the public school that I was in, and I went to a private school in New Rochelle in Westchester. And so that was that was quite a different experience. There was 17 people in my senior class.
Yeah. Were there any particular dojo instructors that really poured into you? You found that were not only helping you obviously learn martial arts, but maybe taught you some lessons about life along the way.
Sort of, right? So I think there were a couple of different instructors. The first was in Taekwondo, and then he left, and then the one that I was with the longest was in Kung Fu, and he was great, but very, very, very specific to martial arts, which was fine. It wasn't like I had a, wonderfully warm relationship, with him where he took the place of a father. I think martial arts is really interesting that, it can be the discipline and everything is the warmth that you get, so I don't want to say that it was cold, but it was not, it wasn't like I had another father, that was there, but I learned an enormous amount, from about myself and about people and all that. So I really think that martial arts was one of the best things that ever happened to me. And in later life as well, I did Kendo and some Wing Chun as well. And again, learned a lot about people and about myself.
What about schoolwork? You'd mentioned that,
Yeah.
kind of an average student, but was there any favorite classes that you liked? I mean, we'll get into your medical field and profession later, but did you have any early signals of that during those early years?
Nope, not really. I mean, grade school and even high school, I did the classes. There wasn't any one particular one that stood out. I think I did school because I needed to do school. I gained an interest, and I think it was because of my father's death. I gained an interest in going into medicine very early on. And when I got to college, that was still my intent, was to go to, become a doctor. But again, I sort of started to develop as a person more, right? When I was in college, and I learned even more about myself in terms of leadership, things that I did. We'll talk about college, I guess, in a bit, but I spent a lot of time doing extracurricular activities that helped me as a person. And so school still wasn't as important to me as it should have been. And I sort of ended up with a B average, which really wasn't, good enough for medical school.
But it was kind of clear you'd go to college, right? Was that
Oh
something
yeah,
that's a
yeah,
goal?
always.
Right.
Even, very early on, and even in the 80s, I think, college was still the thing. I think there was a period in history where college was special, and then at some point it became, well, you're going to college. And, the government was very helpful to people that, don't have a lot of resources, right? So between loans and and grants and things like that, I was able to attend SUNY Stony Brook without, too much of a burden in the after years.
And was that your first choice, or the closest choice to go to school at Stony Brook?
Yeah, I think, it worked out because Stony Brook was only about an hour away, maybe an hour and a half away from my home in the Bronx. So I was able to keep an eye on my mother, who was still alive at that time, and when I first started school. And so that was really the best choice for me. I got into, I think, Boston University. I got into Northeastern. I got into a couple of other places, but I decided to stay local.
Close at hand. And
Yep.
studied psychology and biology, I think, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
was
correct.
that again kind of driven by that interest in the medical field?
Right. And the trick there was, and again, this is me sort of, thinking about the system, you don't have to have a biochemistry degree, which, strains your GPA to get into medical school. You just need to take the prerequisites. So I, did the organic chemistry and the physics and everything that was needed. But the degrees that I got were, not, heavy duty, science. But I really enjoyed psychology and got an interest in, bio psychology and things like that. But it turned out I wasn't going to go that way.
So tell us a little bit about that decision. So after you graduated, typically the course would have been, if you were to go into the medical profession, you go right on to medical school, and you didn't. You started working, came back, got a couple of master's degree later. But what kind of made that decision tree as you kind of came out of your undergrad school?
Yeah. So college, was great. I had a lot of experience. I was a resident assistant, so I learned a lot about leadership there. I was on the volunteer ambulance corps. In fact, very senior roles. I was the safety officer, which meant I trained drivers. I was the vice president and eventually the president. Again, I learned a lot about, leadership, negotiation, and management. And the reason I ended up with the ambulance was I did have to drop out of school for a semester. As my mother was ill, I had to make sure that if we lost certain subsidies from the city, that I would be able to take a full-time job and be able to support my family. So I got my EMT license, but then it turned out that I was able to go back to school, which was great. I went back to Stony Brook. And all this fun and leadership experience and self-learning led to a B average, as I mentioned before. So when I was in undergrad, I started to do medical physics research because when you go to medical school, you have to do something. And pretty randomly, I think a friend of mine said, "Hey, there's this job available in radiation oncology for research. Why don't you do that?" And I did, and it was great. I loved it. It mixed things that I loved, which was computers and medicine. So once I did not get into medical school, they said, "Well, why don't you just stay here and we'll train you in medical physics?" And I said, "Okay, that's a great idea. It's about as good as one I've heard." And I had a great time, and here I am, 25 years later.
Now you have to pronounce this for me because I know I struggle with this for. Is it a dosmetrist or how do you?
Dosimetrist, right? So
Dosimetrist. Okay,
yeah, so
tell us about that. This is the first time
yeah,
I've run across that.
yeah. So it's an allied health profession. I'm a certified medical dosimetrist, and what that means is that my expertise was and is, because it's still an active license, to plan radiation therapy treatments in computer software and work with the physicians and the patients to make sure that when they're getting radiation therapy, that the radiation is being delivered to the tumor and not to the healthy organs. And
Mm.
in the old days, in the late 80s, it was pretty simple, and the computer techniques were quite new. But now it's really amazing with artificial intelligence and adaptive radiation therapy, and it's just a wonderful field. And again, mix the two things I love the most, which were computers and medicine. So I think it's a win, and I think everything ended up the way that it was supposed to.
And you did that at Stony Brook, so it was kind of a
Yeah,
nice continuous learning process for you.
correct.
Did you move into leadership positions there? Were you, managing people in that role, or was it much more of an individual contributor role?
Yeah, at that point in time, it was really individual contributor. I was a medical dosimetrist. I don't remember us having chief, although in a lot of hospitals they do have that. I, you know, I was there, and then I also was at Brookhaven National Labs, which we also had a linear accelerator that we treated patients at. And then I guess my next step was to move over to a small private center, also part of Stony Brook, where I was the only dosimetrist. And then, so I guess you could call me the chief, but I didn't have any folks under me at that time.
But then moved on to Philips Medical Systems, right, in the same field.
Yeah, so it became it was ADAC first, and then Philips acquired them. So ADAC Laboratories was a company that we had purchased the software from, and then one day I remember I called in for service, and I said, "Hey, you guys, it took you a long time to get back to me. What's going on over there?" And they said, "Well, we're short-staffed. We're looking for people." And I said, "Well, what kind of people are you looking for?" And they said, "People like you." And 48 hours later, I was in California, and 48 hours later, I had a job offer
Nice.
from them. So and that was for customer service. So basically, supporting people that did the treatment planning over the phone to help them use the software. And then
And what a great foundation you must have had for that job, given the fact that you'd worked in it for so many years.
Oh yeah, technically, and I think I think the best managers and CEOs, and we'll talk a little bit about this, but I think the best managers and CEOs know their craft. They know the business that they're in. They're not just figureheads or business people. They truly understand the needs of their customers and everyone around, and make the best decisions. And I think that makes good people.
So it was in that job that you first started managing people?
Yes. So it was a small group. It was only 3 of us in support, but the product was just doing extremely well. And we went from, I don't know, 3 people. I started teaching both the applications and even the physics for the software, even though I didn't have a physics degree yet at the time. And as the organization grew, the management there, I think, recognized my capabilities, my willingness to take leadership roles, based on my previous experiences, both in, martial arts and, the work that I had done. One thing we didn't mention before is that when I was in high school, I also worked in a supermarket, and I was an assistant manager there. So that was really the first time that,
right.
people reported to me.
Right.
So I was used to, leading from the front. And I think that experience helped me at ADAC and then at Philips as well.
Any leadership challenges during those years, whether at the supermarket or at Philips?
Yeah, I think I learned a lot about that, right? I think so. First of all, it was just to frame it, it was a supermarket in the Bronx, right? So
Yeah, right. That's your normal supermarket.
Yeah, there were challenges. I mean, attempted robberies and, people that, shoplifters and all kinds of things like that. But I think as a manager, when you're young, I was 18 years old, and a lot of people that there were older than me. And when I was being offered this assistant manager role, a lot of people didn't think that I should have been given it. And so rather than, feel bad about it or argue or try and prove my point, I simply worked my butt off, and I knew everything, did everything, was faster than everyone, and eventually, I think I learned that people follow you when you lead by example, and they know that you are the leader, you are the one. It's not about me telling you I'm the leader, it's about leading, and I think that's the biggest thing I learned when I worked as a kid.
I know you've had lots of different bosses over the years, and one of the areas we always like to talk about is, some of the best and maybe some of the worst, learnings you've got from those. And no names need to be mentioned one way or the other, but share some of those with you. Observance sometimes is one of the best ways to pick up skills.
For sure. I think so. A couple of good memories, right? So when I was with the ambulance corps and I was a president of the ambulance corps, I was still young. I was 19, 20, whatever, how old I was. And we used to have to negotiate, whether it was room rates for the ambulance people, to stay over the summer to support the campus or whatever. And I learned about negotiation. I mean, there was a VP who basically taught me the art of negotiation. One of the things I remember the most is let awkward silences lie. People have an urge to fill those silences. And, once you make your statement, once you give the facts, once you're working with someone, let them respond. Don't feel obligated.
And
I
listen.
learned, yeah, for sure. And I think that was really helpful. I also, learned not to be emotional. I think, I've seen managers, not necessarily my own, but, just in other companies, just respond in a sort of over the top sort of way. And I think people lose respect for you. And I have sort of a favorite saying that you should always be the integral and never the tangent, meaning that, how you respond to something shouldn't be based on the direction of the curve at that actual moment. You should, be assessing everything that's going on, and you should respond in careful measure tones and methods. And I really think that was something that I learned, from a manager, both from positive and negative experiences. So, yeah. And I also learned that, you should give people credit. I think that it's important that when you have people working for you, that they know that you've got their back. And what that means is that, it's a team effort. And the more you support people, the more you work with them, the more committed they are to you. And I think that's a really strong requirement as a leader.
Yeah, terrific. Now, I want to talk about RaySearch Americas. It's a subsidiary of a Stockholm company, Swedish company. We spoke about it earlier. Did you join them as a president and CEO, or did you come in a more subordinate role?
I did. I came in as a president. And so to make a long story short-ish, when I worked for Philips, RaySearch Laboratories in Sweden created some of the algorithms that Philips used for the software that they sold. So I knew of these folks. They knew I was the head of customer service. There was some friendly contact, that sort of thing. I left Philips in 2007, and I went to a company called CIVCO, and I was the vice president of marketing. So in that case, developing, assessing new technologies for radiation therapy, more on the physical equipment side as opposed to software, although there was some software. And then when I was at CIVCO, I sort of saw RaySearch Laboratories doing something. They were demonstrating software at a show. And I approached the founder at the time and I said, "Hey, what are you guys doing?" And I said, "If you ever want to do something here in the United States, if you're planning on coming into this market, I've got a lot of people. Obviously, my experience, in this field would probably help move this along pretty quickly." So in 2010, in December of 2010, I think it was, or November, they asked me to do a presentation, which I did with my, at the time, vice president of sales at CIVCO, and we did a presentation. And the next, I don't know, a few days later, we were in Stockholm. And then a few days later, they were asking me to head up the org.
So tell us, what did you see at that trade show that enticed you into having that conversation with the founder?
Well, I think in business, it's about timing, right? And I think Philips had not been investing in that product. It was pretty clear that they were going to be exiting from that particular radiation oncology market. It's a fairly small business, and I think that the other vendors were complacent. And I saw a software-only company that was doing something great, and I kind of realized that the time was right for this product and that I wanted to be a part of it. So I'm a firm believer in the gut. Like if you've been able to assess the situation and you feel that it's right, that it was worth a shot. And I really wanted to come back to software as well. So that was the other thing. Hardware is a really tough thing, and you make a mistake in hardware, you have to rebuild tools to correct things with with a dozen mechanical engineers and drawings. And software, you fix the code, and it's not as hard. So I sort of missed software.
Did you lead RaySearch's entry then into the Americas, or had they existed already here and you took
No,
over?
I did. Yeah. So we started, and to RaySearch Laboratories' credit, I convinced them at the very beginning. I said, look, customer service is going to be number one. You come into a product as sort of like, a very distant, brand new player. And, if you fail at supporting your customers right out of the gate, you're just not going to succeed. And they respected that. We stayed ahead of the curve. And we introduced it. In fact, I used to have on my slide for customers, I used to have a bullet point about the psychological impact of switching to this brand new product from, things that the medical dosimetrists had been using for years. So I think it was my experience as a dosimetrist and my experience in Philips, because we had 1,400 customers when I was at Philips that I really knew very well. So when it came time to transfer over to our product, the customers had a great deal of trust in me.
Awesome. And 14 years later, you're still going out strong. How big is the organization today, and what's your coverage map?
Yes, we have a little bit over 40 people. We had 50 up around the COVID times, and that was a tough time. Hospitals were not spending money on anything that was not related to ventilators or other equipment that they thought might be needed for the pandemic. So we had a tough time during the COVID years, but then after that, things recovered pretty well. But we're at about 40 people. We cover all of North America and some of South America. We've got some distributors down in South America, but yeah, so and there's a lot. There's about 2,500 radiation oncology centers in the U.S. and Canada.
Awesome. How would you say your leadership's evolved in these last 14 years as you've taken the corner office?
Yeah, it's funny. I listened to one of your podcasts with another CEO, and something he said really struck a chord. He said that the CEO is a really lonely position, and I certainly agree with that. It's you sometimes have to make decisions that people don't like or understand, and they don't have the same data that I do. And I think that's it's a really true statement. I think I'm a very calm leader. I don't think that's changed. I think I'm much better at recognizing individual strengths and then maximizing those and getting them motivated to sort of help me achieve the goals of the company. And it's more like that. So I don't, I'm not a micromanager at all, probably to a fault. And I am I should say, I won't say I'm lenient. I'd say that the right word is that I always look for the best in people and I try and maximize that. And if I can't, then ultimately they have to go. But usually I can find the positives in people.
There's a certain challenge when you take a company that's obviously developed their reputation overseas and introduce it into the U.S. for the first time. And I'm sure many of those challenges maybe revolved around culture and because there's that integration from
Yeah.
one culture to the next. How did you accomplish that? Tell us a little bit about some of the tools that you used in kind of translating that Swedish company culture into RaySearch Americas.
Yeah, for sure. So I think when I worked at Philips, one of my tasks was to train all the distributors around the world in the product that Philips had at the time. So I spent tons of time in Europe and Asia. I mean, Japan, China, uh, Germany, Belgium. I mean, you name it. I was there for extended periods of time. And that exposure, I've been called a very non-American American when I'm overseas. I understand other cultures, and of course Philips is a Dutch company, and so I had experience working for other cultures. And the Swedish culture is, it is different, but I think from a business perspective and everything else, we understand each other very well. I think they learned a lot about us, and in some ways we Americanized them, and in other ways they've I don't know, sweetified's a word for me, but I think I've learned how to handle different cultures, and really the product is the most important thing. Any CEO will tell you that the service and the product that they provide, if it's not good, there's just so much that marketing and talk will do. But we have just a wonderful product, and it was you know brought into these academic centers right away. They loved it, and they continue to love it. We have some of the biggest hospitals in the United States.
How do problems get solved within your organization, and when and how do you get involved?
Yeah, I probably get involved more than I should, and that's really because of the experience that I have, the technical and historical experience, both in customer service and in training and in sales. And so I trust my team. I have good VP of sales. I have good people all around. Head of customer service, head of IT. They're all good people, and they'll escalate things to me pretty quickly when things aren't going in the right direction, and then I can help them uh, go the right way. So I probably more than I should, but in a small organization like this, 40 people, it's big, but it's not outrageously big. I'm involved in a lot of things.
Every company has retention issues, Mark, and I'm sure you've
Hmm.
had some too. What do you do that's different that really tries to keep people
Yeah.
on task, but also motivated for the future to stay with you?
Yeah. So, I think I don't have it in front of me right now, but in certainly my management courses, there's like 3 or 4 key components of what makes people happy, right? So money is, of course, one of them. But I think it's also about the mission, right? So our mission is treating cancer patients. So I think right off the bat, I've got a little something more on my side that makes people motivated to get up every day and do what they do. I think it's about respect. It's about not micromanaging. It's about trying to keep the communication lines open so that people know they can come to you and talk to you. And I have had people tell me that they work here because of me and that they trust me. And I think that's a really key thing.
Is there a lot of employee training that goes on, and do you get involved in that? And, is that part of, kind of what attracts people to come to RaySearch Americas?
So, so my team is almost entirely, board certified physicists and certified medical dosimetrists. I have all type A personalities, highly educated. Sometimes it's a rough, it's a rough position to be in. Luckily, the training, and we're a class 2 medical device, that a lot of the training, the quality system is from the Sweden office. So I'm blessed that, they have control over most of the training and how people have to do. And I wouldn't say that training is something that motivates people. Although when we do bring on new people, learning how to support customers and teach people the product and things like that is a fun component. But a lot of the training, I have to admit, in an FDA sort of environment is somewhat tedious. So that's not one of the positives.
What do you do to keep your own education sharp? That the
Yeah.
saw sharpened technique. Any executive development activity you get involved with? Do you read books, listen to podcasts?
Yeah, it's tough. It's having time and energy for everything is pretty tough. I I stay on top, so I still maintain my license as a certified medical dosimetrist. You actually need 50 credits per year. So I attend webinars, I attend certain shows, and I attend the scientific lectures. I read a lot of papers. As I mentioned, I'm sort of involved in the troubleshooting from time to time, helping my team to get through things. So I'm pretty technically involved. And I recently decided that I was going to get a master's in cybersecurity because, my product is a software product, and I'm constantly dealing with IT organizations and business associate agreements and security agreements and things like that. And so I figured, what better way to keep myself sharp than to do a master's? So I did a master's at Georgia Tech. It was pretty tough, but I got through it. And I'm not a coder, so I had to sort of learn some coding along the way. But it was very rewarding, and I can use that in my current life, and hopefully I'll stay on top of that as well.
Mark, what do you look for when you're making bets on the people you invest in and hire at RaySearch Americas?
Yeah. I think you've probably, and maybe the audience has picked up, I'm sort of a touchy-feely warm person at this point in my career. I mean, it sounds like, from the start, I'm not, given, I grew up in, so to speak, the streets of the Bronx and so forth. But, I really want people, I want to connect with my employees. I want them to be happy that they're here. I want them to understand why they're here. And so when we're interviewing someone, that's my question. I was like, why here? Why now? Why are you leaving your current job? What's going to keep you here, for the next, several years? And I look to make sure that the reason they're not coming is only for money or only because they didn't like their last boss. I want to make sure people are going to be happy here.
If there's somebody lower level in the organization and, you have a fairly small team where, so we're putting aside maybe some of this a direct report. So maybe it's 2 lines below you. If you only had about 5 minutes with that person, what do you try to do during that interview process?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's about asking why they want to be here and making sure that they understand what the paths for promotion are. We in a small organization, unfortunately, there are limitations to how far people can go. It's just an unfortunate thing is you don't want to have a group of 40 people with 10 managers, right? It just doesn't make any sense. So I want to make sure that people understand what's going on, and again, what motivates them. Why is your hat in the ring? Why are you going to be happy here? And we do have folks that aren't dosimetrists and physicists. We have accountants, we have office managers, we have operations managers, and I think each person is their own person, and I sort of do my best to communicate with them at the level that they want to be communicated at. And I think every person, we couldn't run this company without all those different pieces in place, and I try to make them understand that I know that.
Marc, we're just about out of time, but we always have one last CEO guest question, and that's, what kind of career and life advice would you give someone maybe who also grew up in the Bronx and, decided they wanted to have their own corner office someday?
Yeah, for sure. So I have two daughters. I have a 22-year-old daughter who just graduated University of Georgia, and she's working in a marketing firm. She's going to be super successful. I have another daughter that's about to go to college at Florida State. She's interested in criminology. And I would give everyone the same advice that I give them, right? So first of all, don't rush. I've seen it way too many times that people, you're in an organization, show your interest in management, show that you are willing to take on responsibilities, but certainly don't become a backstabber. Don't, try and jump on the ladder ahead of other people. It's learn your craft and become the best worker that you can be. And then hopefully if you're in the right company, people are going to recognize that. The other thing is that I think the advice I always hear is to find a mentor or someone in the company that's going to be your champion. Absolutely true. Support that person, and don't constantly look for credit. You and your manager or this person, they know what you've accomplished, right? So sort of nurture that relationship, help that person along. When you help them, they help you because they're going to move up because of the work that you do. So I think that's it. And then I guess there's two other quick things. One is to be calm under fire. Don't take things personally. You're in a job. Even if things are meant personally, when you go home, you have your family that loves you, your friends respect you. Stay focused and don't become emotional. And then the last thing is, be ready for opportunity. I think opportunity will often come, and when someone offers you a position, if there's any chance in the world that you're going to be able to do that, you always say yes. Always take those opportunities, and that's what I would give to advice to my daughters and to everyone else.
My guest today is Marc Mlyn. He's the CEO and president of RaySearch Americas. RaySearch is advancing cancer treatment through Pioneer software. This software has limited potential, and they believe it's now the driving force for innovation in oncology treatment. Marc Mlyn, thank you so much for sharing your story into the corner office.
Thanks for the opportunity. I appreciate it, Brent.
Hey, listeners, if you enjoyed the podcast today, we'd love to hear your questions. We're introducing a new opportunity for our listeners to send us a voice memo at info@go4roi.com. That's info@go4roi.com. Send us a voicemail, keep it a minute or less, and let us know what you'd like to ask our CEOs. We'll promise to broadcast it on the air as soon as we receive it. Can't tell you which CEO will do it, but we'd love to have your input, and we'll let you know when your question's being asked. Thanks so much, and thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to Into the Corner Office with Brant Hanley. We hope you enjoyed hearing our guest CEO story as much as we did. If you want to hear more CEOs reveal their journey into the corner office, please subscribe via iTunes and tell your friends and colleagues. For more information about Brant, Resource Options International, and the mighty middle market, visit www.go4roi.com. We look forward to having you join us for our next episode.